Good morning to everyone joining us for the session. We'll give our audience a little bit more time to enter the session and kick off from there. All right, we might start, Adam, if you're okay with that.
Sounds wonderful.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for what seems like our very first webinar for a little while. We have a really great session today featuring insights from the 10th edition of the National Truck Accident Research Centre report, or the NTI report. You'll learn a little bit about why trucks crash and hear some surprising findings about the links between vehicle maintenance and crashes, plus much more. While we wait for more of our audience to join us, I'll run through the usual housekeeping and particulars for today. Today's presentation is worth one CPD point. If you're not able to stay for the full duration, the presentation is available to you on demand for 5 working days after this live session. All you need to do is click on the same link in the original invitation and it should pop up on your screen as a recording. I know many of you will be watching us from home, but if you are listening to this webinar in a socially distanced team environment, please send us an email to webinar@nti.com.au with the names of everyone you've got in the room with you, along with your business name, so that we can ensure everyone receives their CPD certificate. As always, we encourage you to ask questions through the session. Please feel free to ask anything that you might have on your mind, and Adam will either answer them as we go or wait until the end. Finally, a short survey should appear on your screen at the end of the session. We've had some fantastic feedback and ideas from many of you out there from previous webinars. So please take the time to complete the questions so that we can continue to bring even more relevant and interesting topics to present. So let's get started for today. My name's Farah Locke. I'm part of the customer team here at NTI and will be hosting the session today. Joining us is a presenter whom many of you would know of, or in the very least would have heard speak before. Adam Gibson is NTI's Transport and Logistics Risk Engineer. Based at our head office here in Brisbane, Adam is a self-described truck nerd. He's had a variety of careers across all facets of transport operations and safety, including a role at the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator leading their roadworthiness program. His expertise ranges from the practical through to the philosophy of regulation, but his real passion lies in working with government, industry and regulators to support good safety practices through relevant insights and policy. To this end, Adam authors NTI's NTI Major Accident Report, which analyses trends in truck safety based on claims history. Alongside this, he's also involved in a wide range of industry advocacy and research projects. So that's it from me for now. Over to you, Adam.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction, Farah. I feel almost bashful after my own introduction. Thank you all for coming along. Really fantastic attendance numbers. I hope the presentation is really great, but the biggest value is always in that Q&A. So please jump in there. I'll tell you what. Best question of the session, I will send a Trucks Rock hat and a bottle of wine out to whoever asks the best question on the day. So jumping into my slide deck now, I hope you can all see that there. Farah, can I get a thumbs up? Wonderful, fantastic. Obviously, we're here from NTI. We are Australia's specialist insurer. If it's transport and logistics, it's very likely that we are not just in there, but the market leader. This presentation is predominantly about my NTI Major Accident Investigation Report, but there's a few other things happening on the periphery that I think you get some value from as well. 2021 saw a shift for us in the NTI space, that we're continuing to release that report and be the preeminent source of this data. Like, the NTI report is cited in every single Australian road safety reform for the last decade. We are the leading source of heavy vehicle road safety data. But what we've been told by both industry and government, it's literally our customers telling us this, is they want us more involved in the solution. that because of our privileged position as neither competitor nor regulator, we bring independent insights into not just what the problem is, but what we can do to solve it. And we acknowledge in that often we won't be the experts, we won't be the solution, but that if one of our customers is doing something amazing that has helped improve the safety or even the profitability of their business in one sector, we can potentially draw on that expertise and hand it off to a customer in another sector. And that's, again, a really privileged role that we are lucky to enjoy because of the trust between us and our insured customers. So in 2021, we had a range of key findings. And I try to limit the number of stories we're trying to tell because we could bombard the world with data, whereas what I want to do is I want to drive change and drive action. Key stories, driver error. This is continuing to go up. Long story short, and I'll drill into those later on in the slide deck, is depending on how you count, basically 2/3 of our large loss crashes, this being crashes over $50,000 incident cost, are the result of some form of human error. And that's to be expected. Our drivers are human and to err is human. We have a positive story to tell around fatigue, but an ongoing concern over our truck and car crashes, and a bit of a mixed message around the loss of life amongst our insured drivers on the roads in 2020. So the first thing I think you have to talk about if you're talking about anything that occurred in 2020 is COVID. That's inescapable. This is a plot of heavy vehicle and light vehicle traffic volumes on a interstate highway in New South Wales, comparing 2019 to 2020. And the obvious thing is when we went into our first lockdown in April 2020, was a massive reduction, about a 60% reduction in light vehicle traffic volumes, and a smaller reduction, about a 40% reduction in heavy vehicle traffic volumes. That recovered to some degree, but overall, the light vehicle kilometres travelled in 2020 was around 20% lower for the full year than the long-term trend. And that tells the first story that I really need to talk about in 2020, is that overall, we had fewer truck crashes. About a 16% reduction in the frequency of a 20% reduction in the frequency of large losses. So number of major crashes for each truck that we insure, driven by a 16% reduction in multi-vehicle truck and car crashes. And this raises a bunch of really interesting questions, like who knew that working from home was actually a road safety intervention? Like that was actually something we should be encouraging to continue to drive down Australia's road toll, both light and heavy. We saw a normalisation fairly quickly of heavy vehicle traffic volumes because the freight has to keep moving. At NTI, we were exceptionally privileged to be part of the government's working group to look at freight issues during COVID. We were the only private business in that space. You had state transport associations, health departments, and then you had an insurance company. And again, it speaks to this privileged position and how seriously NTI takes it, that we weren't just invited into that room. A number of the other participants flatly insisted that we had to be there. So that was something we're very proud of. So looking at the first of I started talking about driver error crashes. Last year, I talked a lot about inattention and distraction crashes. Those numbers have continued to be a concern, but the one that I want to focus on, one of two that I want to focus on this year, are inappropriate speed crashes. Now, the first thing I need to say is that inappropriate speed crashes almost never involve speeding. You need to separate inappropriate speed from speeding. That it's entirely possible to have an inappropriate speed crash in a heavy vehicle at 20 kilometers an hour. The classic one in that space, I don't know if anyone here has any customers that do concrete deliveries with concrete agitators, but their natural enemy is the roundabout. And it's possible to roll a concrete agitator at walking pace at a roundabout. And so it's important, I have to call that out first, because the worst outcome we could have on this discussion is that this gets into the hands of particularly the police space, and they try to address this by putting more radar guns and speed cameras out on straight sections of roads. So when I talk about inappropriate speed, what do I mean if I don't mean speeding? These are overwhelmingly single vehicle, single truck or semi-trailer rollovers on bends, on corners, on off-ramps, on roundabouts. And this is simply that as a vehicle goes around a corner, the driver has chosen to drive at a speed such that because of the high center of gravity of that vehicle, it falls on its side, slides to a stop. Your customer then picks up the phone and rings your claims people. They pass it on to ours, and the wheels of insurance game kick in. It had been going down, and that's a positive story. But over the last 3 reports, over the last 4 years, that decline has stopped. And that's my concern here, is I want to see that number continue to go down further and further. So looking more closely at inappropriate speed, the first thing I'd say is it's really, really easy to blame the drivers here. It'd be really easy to go and say, you should have driven at an appropriate speed. The challenge, I say, is, well, what is an appropriate speed? What speed should you drive? Where is the limit? Historically, and I mean for 100 years of road transport, the only way you as a truck driver could discover where that limit was to go beyond it and fall over. That we have proxy ways of trying to pass on that knowledge. When you're a young person working in a transport business, they put you in the passenger seat and you see how fast the guy who's driving drives, and then you swap seats. And you're behind the wheel for the first time, and he clips you around the ear and says that was too fast. But even that's sort of almost a herd knowledge, and it's not reliable, because how good is the driver you're learning from is understanding where the limit is. What happens when you jump into a different truck? What happens when the load changes or you drive on a road you haven't driven before? So as tempting as it is to blame the drivers, we need to go further. We need to look at what else we can do to support them. So firstly, next, where do they happen? Now, 43% of them happen on national or state highways. The Pacific, the Bruce, the Hume, all of these roads. But that doesn't tell a particularly rich story 39%, 43% is all overall. If you compare to where my inappropriate speed losses occur to where all of my losses occur, it starts to suggest there's something else going on here. The reason why most of our large losses happen on major highways is because most road freight travels on major highways. The areas where these are overrepresented are on B roads. It's what I call town-to-town road. It's the Bdouble Desert Road, because those roads have a lot more challenging geography, and they have a lot more challenging geometry that you essentially can't have an inappropriate speed crash on the Hume anymore, because there is no part of that road that you can't drive in a truck at 100 kilometers an hour for the most part. There's a couple of caveats I'll put on that, but as a general rule, if the road is straight enough and flat enough, this loss type will not occur. And it also points to the freight occupations that our mutual customers are likely to have that are going to be at the greatest risk. So I'll say here, milk tankers is one of a real concern. They're operating in some of the most challenging country areas with a sloshing load and time critical freight task. Your livestock operators, anyone whose freight task sees them running out into country areas onto more minor roads. So what can we do? The first thing is to challenge some myths. And this goes back to what I was saying around this tendency to throw this all at the feet of the drivers. The drivers almost encourage this, that, I wouldn't have crashed it like that person did because I'm a super trucker. And it's simply not the case. That the drivers we're seeing that are having these losses have 20 years of driving experience in those vehicles. That the belief that you'll feel this through the seat of your pants and be able to back it off a little bit before it happens is simply not backed up by the experiences of those drivers that have had these losses. In a past life, I was a truck design engineer. I can tell you that we actually tune how much the driver of the truck feels through the seat of his pants. We can change parts of the geometry of the suspension underneath the cab of the truck, and we can make it feel like the truck's about to roll over at low speed, or we can move it the other way and make it feel like a race car. And you sit there and you tune this up and down to get a truck that is both pleasant to drive, but still gives reasonable feedback. So I'll feel it through the seat of my pants. No, only if the person who designed that truck wants you to. We can give them the best vehicles we can. And there's some really great innovation happening in this space. The Australian Trucking Association has done some work on a rigid drawbar converter dolly that lets road trains, A doubles, A triples, drive more like a B combination. I'll come back to this later on in my presentation. The one I really want to talk about, though, is using the data from smart braking systems to provide feedback back to drivers so that they understand how much of a margin of error they have, how close to the limit they are at any time. And finally, we need to make sure that we empower the rest of the supply chain to load the vehicle in the way that gives the driver the best chance of making it to the destination safely, or at very least to let the driver know when there's something different about a load that they need to know about, so they can get told, "Oh, be aware that there's a generator inside that container that's up quite high, you'll need to be careful." That sort of information is exceptionally powerful. There's been some really great work done in the forestry industry in Victoria about just telling the loaders, the guys that are loading up those vehicles, that how they load it makes a difference. And if they can't give the driver a good load, at least give them good information. So I talked about smart braking systems. What I want to talk about here is what's called electronic stability control, or ESC. It goes under some other names as well: trailer stability control, roll stability control. It's essentially that the braking system on the truck and or trailers has additional sensors that let it sense how close to rolling over the combination is. And this happens in two stages. The first one is if you've ever gone into a corner, whether it's in a car, a bicycle, a motorcycle, or a truck, and you've had the pit of your stomach tighten up because you've just realized that corner is a bit tighter than you were expecting. The computer does the same thing. That's called a level 1 intervention. When it senses that using accelerometers, which is essentially the same technology that's in your phone, it can then just ever so lightly apply the brakes. It'll tend to flash a light on the dashboard as well. And what that does is it just adds a little bit of drag into the braking system, and it then monitors the wheel speed at the wheel ends. When it sees the speed of any wheel that it's monitoring suddenly start to slow down or drop to 0, it knows that wheel has left the ground, that the wheel is no longer being spun by the road. And that tells it that you are tantalizingly close to being involved in a rollover crash. At that point, it does what's called a level 2 intervention, where it will quite aggressively brake the rest of the brakes on the combination, particularly those on the laden side of the vehicle, to settle it down and stabilize it. Now, obviously, having the braking system save you in that very, very close near miss at that point is a very good thing. But the real value of these systems is gathering the data that they create and feeding it back through your depot managers, your workshop managers in your clients' businesses, and back to the driver so they can know how close to it they are. Why I mention this is you're going to have a pile of your insured customers out there in the heavy motor space that are getting this technology whether they want it or not, because it's progressively becoming mandatory for trailers from a year ago, and it becomes mandatory for the prime movers early next year. And they don't know this. They don't know that the data even exists, and they don't know about how it can change the safety profile of their business by feeding that data back to their customers. I've got some customers who went from having like 3 or 4 total loss crashes in a year to having none for 3 years off the back of this sort of work. So the potential change in their insurance risk profile is massive. A comment here that I'll take, and I think it's really quite good, from Stuart Gardner, and he says that complacency is the enemy. That's a really good point here, Stuart, that one of the things we look at is for these single vehicle rollover crashes, is that piece of road that the driver's driving on new to them? Like, is that the first time they've driven around that bend? And it's generally not the case. It's generally they've been around that bit of road 100 times. I had a large loss of a concrete agitator 86 meters from the front gates of the batching plant where he loads every single day for 8 or 9 loads a day. And so it's impossible to suggest that he wasn't familiar with that piece of road. It's complacency, the tendency to drive into a corner at 55 kilometers an hour, and then we'll try it at 56. And well, if it worked at 56, I'll try it at 57. As to whether a license is the right tool, I don't think that's the case. Licensing is a very coarse mesh. It's not particularly hard to pass through. I think having someone inside the business that's talking to you about how they are driving, how you're driving, and the company's expectations is more powerful. That if it's simply just passing back through that licensing process, an industry will be created of teaching to the test, essentially. So it's better that it's in-house, in my view, or at least that it's integrated into the business. A question also here, and I'll take now before I roll on, from Lynn Dobby. She asks, does the braking system also affect the steering? No, not so it can't, for example, steer to straighten up the vehicle to try and stabilize it. It just applies the brakes. Although it does, depending on the system, it will apply more braking on the laden side of the vehicle because those tires have more grip. So it's called electronic brake force distribution, which goes under the acronym of EBD. I am full of these wonderful acronyms. I will have to make a nice little guide one day. So the next one I want to talk about, and it's really there's two inside the driver error space that I want to focus on in 2021, inadequate following distance crashes. And whereas inappropriate speed crashes, which are predominantly single vehicle crashes, is really a problem for transport as an industry, us, our customers, our mutual customers, your customers to own, inadequate following distances are more complicated. They are overwhelmingly multi-vehicle crashes. Every once in a while, we'll have a crash where they don't have enough following distance, but they swerve off the road. And so it's only a single vehicle crash, even though multiple vehicles were involved. And the reason I choose this one is because they all look the same. It's 9.6% of my large losses. So call it about, we have almost 100 of them each year. This is over $50,000. They tend to the extreme where the truck is driving along in traffic. Suddenly traffic slows, and that might be because a car has broken down. It might be because a box fell off a ute 200 meters ahead. It might be someone pulling into a driveway. Traffic slows down. The truck is unable to slow sufficiently or quickly enough and runs into the back of the vehicle in front of it. And unfortunately for our respective claims teams, often pushes that vehicle into the vehicle in front of it and the vehicle in front of it and the vehicle in front of it. And all of a sudden we are there with third party number 7 and trying to work out which of the 3 white Camrys that were involved this particular caller is responsible for. And again, I'm going to start with a word of caution. It would be very easy to say, again, let's hold this entirely at the feet of truck drivers. And they are not, they are part of the solution that needs to take place here as well. But talk to any truck driver and they will say the same thing, that if I leave the potentially 100 meters plus following distance in front of my truck that I need while driving in traffic, multiple other cars will dive into that space and immediately erode that stopping distance. If I then back off to reestablish that stopping distance, more cars will overtake me and pull back into that space. And as a truck driver, I will essentially travel backwards through traffic. You run the risk of almost coming to a stop. So what do we think? Well, first of all, a bit more of a look at what is adequate following distance. Again, if I've said it's inadequate, what do we actually need? If you're driving along in your car and it's a reasonably modern car with passably maintained tires and you're on a dry piece of bitumen and you pull your right foot up next to your shoulder and fire it at the brake pedal, it will take you about 50 meters to come to a stop. It's really quite violent. If you haven't ever done like a defensive driving course, the stopping ability of a modern car is much better than the human brain expects. Truck brakes are different. They use pneumatics, both for physically pushing the braking components together, but also for the signal to request that the brakes be applied. So the brake pedal is really just a small air valve. So if the truck driver sees a car's brake light suddenly come on, the first thing they're going to have is a reaction time. That's just human. Then they hit the brake pedal. Then an air signal travels down to a series of valves, one that applies the brakes on the steer axle, then on the drive group on the prime mover, then on the first trailer, then on the dolly, then on the next trailer in this example. And so you end up with a 157 meter stopping distance for, in this example, an A-double or a type 1 road train, a 2-trailer road train. This means to not have a crash, you need 107 meters of following distance. And I put the question to everyone in the room, When was the last time driving down the highway you saw 107 meters of following distance between any two vehicles, light, heavy, whatever else? It simply doesn't exist out there. And again, talk to any truck driver. And I see Jenny's question about observation about being married to a truck driver. Guarantee, go and talk to any truck driver at all and ask them, could they establish an 107 meter stopping distance while driving up the Monash, or particularly something, the distances will be shorter, but driving along Parramatta Road, you'd be lucky to have half a car length before there's two cars trying to jam in front of your truck. So what can we do to change this? Can we influence this directly, tell truck drivers to back off? No, that on its own won't do it. The first thing we need to change, and it goes to Jenny's question, is we need to change car driver behaviour. And that's tough because it's not something I as an insurer, you guys as brokers, or the transport industry as an industry can do directly. So we need involvement of governments and road agencies to change this number. The other thing I'll say is it should be a regulatory intervention. We tend in trucking issues to go straight to punishment, but for some reason in the light vehicle space, in the car space, it's always education. I believe it needs to be both. There needs to be both awareness, and there's some good campaigns out there. The ATA, the NHVR. My favorite one is actually a TMR one under their Street Smarts banner that has a football field projected in front of the dashboard of a truck to understand just how big that space needs to be. But the stick should be involved as well. I would love to see what's done in other markets, in the US particularly. They put police in trucks, and the police in the truck drive along the highway. They wait till someone cuts in front of them. They radio to a police car or a police bike that's 100 meters back. They come up, they pull the person over, they book them, and they just drive up and down the highway doing this over and over again. We need to involve our drivers as well. I'm certain that of the people in this session, there will be numerous, almost everyone, I'll suggest 95% of us had a negative experience where some truck tailgated us unreasonably. We need to call out those negative behaviours in trucking and make it clear that they will not be tolerated. The next thing we can do is back it up with technology. And there's two technologies I want to talk about here. I'll skip the acronyms till the slide that's on it. Before we get to that, I want to share a video, and I've commissioned from a customer here, the wonderful Jeff Crouch of Ron Crouch Transport, around some of the behaviours our drivers out there on the roads are dealing with every day. Let me just make sure my screen share is set up to optimize for video. Sorry, I'll do that there. Excellent. All right, have a watch of this. Should have had a light language warning there. Oops. Yeah, so sorry, need the next slide me. Yeah, so that was turn off the optimize for. So that was two Ron Crouch Transport trucks. What are the odds? Both trucks, one each going each way, were both from the same 25-year NTI customer and personal friend. Incidents like that happen continuously. There would be 100 of those happening just in the hour while we're having this wonderful chat. Obviously, that's not directly on my following distance example. That's more of an overtaking issue, but car driver behaviour is a significant part of heavy vehicle road safety. So the two technologies I want to touch on in the inadequate following distance space. First one is autonomous emergency braking. So this uses either just radar, and those systems honestly are not my favorite, or radar augmented with cameras to sense when there's the risk of an impending collision. They can literally, in the case of camera systems, see forwards and see cars coming the other way or parked on the side of the road or suddenly slowing. The first thing they do is they warn the driver. They will flash lights, they will beep, and they'll say, hey, driver, essentially the truck is trying to save itself. It says, oh, could you please apply the brakes? If the driver responds, the system hands off responsibility to them. If the driver of the truck does not respond, the system will undertake a full emergency brake. It basically will throw you forwards against your seatbelt, glue your eyeballs to the windscreen. It is a big stop. The goal isn't always to completely avoid a collision, but it's predominantly to reduce the severity. the catch with AEB is it's essentially only available as an OEM fitment option when you buy a new truck, and it hasn't been available for that long. The other technology that's relevant in this inadequate following distance space is forward collision warning systems. The most prominent of this is a company called Mobileye, which is actually owned by Intel. And they can use sensors to detect an impending collision, but they just alert you. They can't apply the brakes themselves directly, although they do have some other interesting features like warning you about whether you're speeding. They have the latest system can include, depending on which boxes you tick, blind spot monitoring to tell you there's a car parked down the side of your truck, and a range of other advanced driver assistance features. Why I mention it is available as an aftermarket retrofit, so you can go and fit these into your trucks without having to turn over your whole fleet. The other question that comes up is, oh, surely we could just make the trucks stop better. And past life, I was a truck braking certification engineer, so I'm pretty good to speak on this. There's a system called EBS, electronic braking system, that replaces that airline controlling the brakes. So augments, is added to, and adds an electronic signal that's essentially instantaneous to that. If we were to fit that to that example we gave, we'd shorten up the following distance by 17 meters. That still means we need 90 meters of following distance. And again, we just don't see that out on the highway. We can put better brakes on the truck. We can put air disc brakes throughout the combination, and we can shorten it up by 23 meters. But again, we're still looking at needing, what's that, 86 meters of following distance. We just don't have that. The two combined can take 40 meters out of that stopping distance. So we're down to needing 60 odd meters of following distance. Honestly, even that is not going to be sufficient on its own. The real solution to this is addressing the fact that all Australians drive too close on the highways. And the only way we can do that is through government and regulatory intervention. So the headline stat in that, so it's end of inadequate following distance. Let me just have a quick review of the questions. Sorry, bear with me. Question here from Scott Sedner. It's a really good one. If a car pulls in front of a truck and is hitting the rear, does dash camera footage prove you are not the truck's fault? We certainly look for that. And I'm a big believer in dash camera footage and dash cameras generally for exonerating our drivers. I believe that prior to dash cameras, our drivers likely got the short end of the stick. People just assumed the truck was at fault, even when it was not. However, if you're already, particularly from 100 kilometers an hour, if you're doing a stop from 100 kilometers an hour and you were going to have enough stopping distance, and then a car pulls up in front and you don't have enough of a margin for an additional, say 5, or to shorten your stopping distance by 6 meters, you had already left it too late, is the reality. So we certainly look for that, and our claims consultants and our recoveries team are the best, full stop, no questions asked, in the business. So if we believe we were not at fault, we will fight vehemently, but it's a small slice. It might be, I'd suggest, single digits of these ran into rear claims where that is a relevant consideration. Most of the time, the vehicles are in their lanes and there's not enough stopping distance, or the driver cannot react fast enough, or a combination of the two. But no, certainly if we believe that the other vehicle was at fault, regardless of it being a nose to tail crash, we will fight it. Very quickly, Jenny observes that she's married to a truck driver, and there's a lot of issues around car driver behavior. I think I've probably covered that sufficiently. I couldn't agree more that car driver behavior around our trucks is a pretty serious issue. And I'll actually come back to the next slide, is directly on point for this, is from Samantha, is that, are we training car drivers relating to truck stopping distances? Not enough. There is some awareness campaigns out there, and I might see if we can include in the follow-up email that we send out with this via Farah, the wonderful Farah, might I add, one of my favorite people, some of those videos, but the penetration's not there. And there's a whole world of compliance theory and behavioral psychology that says people really only pay attention if there's a stick as well. And the reality is your likelihood as a car driver being booked for behaving badly around a truck is near enough to zero. So on that note, this is probably a nice segue there. One of our biggest sort of talking points in recent years have been where a truck and a car are involved in a fatal crash, that the truck is not at fault. 80% of the time. And that was consistent again in our 2020 claims data. The actual number was 78.6, I think, but essentially 80%. On the other hand, when we look at our non-fatal truck and car crashes, about 2/3 of the time, the truck is the at-fault party. So those proportions flip and reasonably dramatically. Behind this is what the crashes look like. The reason the numbers are so different is that the crashes are extremely different. Car at fault crashes tend to be either head-on, the car crossing over the centre line into the path of the truck, or T-bone crashes, cars pulling out of side roads into the path of a truck. A common one here is what's called a look but didn't see crash, where someone comes up to a give way or a stop line. Times from the dashcam footage, you can literally see it. They look down towards the truck, for whatever reason, it doesn't register and they pull out regardless. One issue I have here is, particularly in regional South Australia, they have a lot of regional highways in South Australia that still have crossings that require you to cross over a live lane of traffic to go the other direction. And older persons are significantly overrepresented in fatal crashes at those sorts of intersections involved with trucks. The other item here that we track, but is very, very challenging for us, is the contribution of intentional acts, suicides and murder-suicides to these fatal car and truck crashes. Because of the reduction in traffic volumes in 2020 because of COVID, the proportion of accidental truck and car fatal crashes went down, but the proportion of intentional ones remained reasonably static. And so rather than the 37.5, 37.8% of our fatal truck and car crashes being intentional in previous years, it was 43% of our truck and car fatal crashes were intentional, or would appear to have been intentional in 2020. There is some work that's being done in that space. We're part of a project managed by the National Road Safety Partnership Program looking at suicide in road transport, and are also a big supporter of Healthy Heads and Trucks and Sheds, a really fantastic road transport driver health and wellbeing initiative. So the other issue, and this one's a reasonably quick one, it's really just to close this out. We've talked a lot in previous years about fatigue. The positive story I can tell here is we saw a reduction to the lowest proportion of all of our large losses caused by fatigue in 2020 at 8%, down from the sort of 10% level it was for the last two reports, and dramatically down from the 27% where we were in the early 2000s. Queensland, my home state, regrettably retook the title as the state with the highest number of fatigue crashes for a given volume of road freight. This is predominantly around issues around the Bruce Highway, that the Bruce Highway is in a bad place, that it is a little strip of land between the Great Dividing Range and the ocean, and we've tried to put a major freight route on that. So you either are driving a long way above floodplains, so if you leave the road at all, particularly as a result of falling asleep, the severity of the crash is likely to be high, or it's where the range comes down to meet the coast and there's very little space for the road, and so you're crashing into terrain. This makes some recent announcements around upgrading of the inland freight corridor west of the Great Dividing Range very significant, and I believe that as we see that corridor upgraded and freight shift from east of the Dividing Range to west of the Dividing Range, we'll see better road safety outcomes and outcomes for our drivers as a result of that work. Again, just closing it, really a story from last year. In 2019, we reported that there'd been a significant spike, a 60% increase in the number of truck occupants who had lost their lives in road crashes in Australia. I'm really careful on my language here. What I will say is that 2020, we saw that number return to levels consistent with prior years. What I do not want to describe it as, and what is a trap, is to call that normal. We should never and must never consider having, in this case, 31 of our drivers lose their lives in their workplace as normal. It would not be accepted in any other industry, and we should not accept it in road transport. On that note, I track the safety performance of the road transport industry using road deaths per billion tonne kilometres of freight, or truck involved road deaths. This is slightly different. This is just looking at truck occupant deaths for a given volume of freight. And what I want to say here is the long-term trend is not positive. It's actually perfectly level, that we are seeing no improvement in road safety outcomes for our insured drivers. and more needs to be done in that space. It's all well and good to say, oh, great, there's fewer people involved dying in truck-involved crashes, but we also need to protect our people. So now going on to the broader story. One second, I will actually pause there and have a quick jump back through the Q&A just to make sure there's nothing on that I'm running past. Bear with me. Farah, if you've got any that you think I should jump onto, please don't hesitate to.
All I was going to say is we've had a real flood of questions, it seems. So, you know, I've got a lot of people asking me for a recording of this session afterwards. We will make sure that we get a copy of this out to you as part of our follow-up resources, so you can send it on to your clients and anyone else you think might get value out of this session. Given the number and the volume of questions that we have received, it might be best, Adam, answer what you feel you can answer now. And the rest of them that we don't get to, we might do a bit of a Q&A answer sheet that we send out along with the recording and perhaps a copy of the latest accident investigation report.
No, I think it's a wonderful idea. I'll roll on. I'll roll through this reasonably quickly, and then we'll take as many questions as we can there at the end and take the rest on notice. So first thing is, I'm a big believer that the single most important thing in the safety of a transport business is cultural. That I don't particularly put a lot of weight into someone showing me a folder that says this is our fatigue management policy, significantly changing the fatigue outcomes in that business. What matters is, are your drivers getting regular high quality sleep? Do they feel empowered to stop driving if they don't feel safe to continue, or particularly to not commence driving where something has harmed their sleep in their days and time off? In that space, we have a cultural program called Traction that goes into transport businesses, looks to measure the culture inside that business, and particularly the real goal here is to work with the management of the business to come up with a plan of what they're going to do to change it, both in the short term, what's the quick win you can do next week, and what are you going to do over the next 3 to 6 months to improve the safety culture, and particularly, this is the key here, communication inside your business to make it, really it's a better workplace. Good workplaces are safe workplaces. Safe workplaces are good workplaces. The other thing we've been working on a lot are resources for our mutual customers. We've built a home on our website called the Better Business Hub. We got some funding from a Heavy Vehicle Safety Initiative grant from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator to make a program of work around safety-related topics under the title of The Business of Safety, where we go and talk about technology in your business, how to manage fatigue in your business, and particularly how to support leadership in your business, how to make your people aspire to be better and aspire to make your business better. We'll include a link to that Better Business Hub in the follow-up email. We also hold a monthly lunch and learn for our transport operators, where we bring in the great speakers that we come across, that we meet, that we know, that we insure, and share the brilliance of what they're doing across the rest of our customer base. That's why to everyone, we don't limit it to just our insured customers. If someone wants to come along, they are more than welcome to register and attend. This is an example of one of the pieces we've made for that Better Business Hub as part of the Business of Safety. Just a nice, simple, clean infographic on some really key technologies that improve safety outcomes in trucking. I won't labour the point. I just want you to know that it exists and that you can point, you can have a look yourself, or you can point your customers there. More particular, this is the one I really love. This is aimed for you. A significant portion of my job is I want you as a broker to feel supported when you're talking to your transport customers, because that's what NTI does. We are specialists at what we do. We want you to know that you can lean on us and that we will help you and your customers. So we made some really cool videos, and I'll play this one. I'll cross my fingers that this all works. Let me go back to optimize for video clip. Now, I hope that was as useful for you guys as I believe it will be. I dread to think what proportion of us have heard Bdouble on the news or in our work and have never had anyone actually sit down and explain what a Bdouble is. I'd love every trucking journalist or every sort of mainstream journalist before they do a trucking story to have watched that video. There was one other piece of work I was going to cover, but we're a little tight on time. I'll just summarize it very briefly. We did a report using our data on claims and the NHVR's data on defects, essentially to examine the relationship between do operators with better trucks have fewer crashes, and found about a 16% reduction for operators whose trucks got a clean bill of health. They're involved in 16% fewer crashes. I won't talk about that work further. You can find it on our Better Business Hub, but some really cool stuff, an example of some of the other work we do. We have a lot of questions to run through, so I'll do my best. We'll see how we go for time. I'm sure Farah will keep me honest. So let me jump in here. I've got a few questions on tyre pressure monitoring systems. I'm quite strong on TPMS. The most important tyres you can monitor on a combination are on a heavy vehicle are the steer tyres. That a failure of a tyre elsewhere in the combination is unlikely, not impossible, and unlikely to result in a serious crash, whereas a steer tyre failure is a genuine emergency right here, right now. So what I'd love to see in trucking is I'd love every telematics system, or alternatively built into every truck, monitoring of pressures on those steer tyres. It is just that they are really the only component that truly scares me if we have a failure. Covered that, sorry, bear with me. Brad makes an observation around dash camera systems and how powerful they are for showing the bad behavior of car drivers, particularly for anyone operating or anyone who has a customer operating a transport business in that peri-urban area. So, you know, in suburbia around cities, I'm a big advocate of dash cameras. The best systems are a 4-camera system, one facing forwards, one facing into the cab, and 2 facing backwards, one off each rear view mirror. And it gives a really good picture of what's going on around the vehicle. Ian Poulton asks a question on facial recognition technology. So the tech that probably interests me around facial recognition is more the AI-driven cameras for monitoring attention and fatigue. It's powerful stuff. Fatigue is still the largest killer of our insured drivers. The other one he talks about is adjacent lane crashes, where cars behave poorly around trucks. I think we covered that pretty well in the session. I believe what we need to see there is a road manager regulatory intervention. Tony's question around cars cutting in front of trucks. Look, it's a real issue. I sort of touched on it a little earlier. Those stats I talked about won't be the ones where we could demonstrate that, because they'll be captured separately under not at fault. So in our data structure, don't hold me on the percentage, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it's in the low teens of our large loss crashes are not at fault. And that's predominantly because most of our large loss crashes are single vehicle. Driver behavior crashes predominantly see the truck leave the road on its own. We've got an anonymous question here around including more trucking information in learners logbooks. Really good point, and one that the amazing Dr. Sarah Jones from Toll is very strong on. She is very firmly putting it to state transport agencies that we are missing in action essentially around heavy vehicle safety when we induct light vehicle drivers into our systems.
Adam, we've had a couple of questions regarding the safety differences between A doubles and B doubles. Do you want to cover that off really quickly?
Yeah, really fascinating one. So we did some work for the regulator with the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, CILTA, looking at PBS combinations. And so you've really got to break A doubles into 2 categories: traditional road trains, so 2 and 3 trailer road trains, or A doubles and A triples, versus their PBS equivalents. A PBS Bdouble is significantly safer than a non-PBS Bdouble, but a PBS Btriple carries a similar amount of freight and is significantly safer again. Roll coupled combinations, so B combinations where the whole thing is tied together, it has to roll as one unit, have significantly better dynamics than A combinations where they're not roll coupled. I'll see if we haven't got too much in the email, I'll include a little video I did on a trial the ATA did on a rigid drawbar converter dolly, which improves some of the dynamics. There's also some cool work being done by Tiemann tankers and others about roll coupling A-type combinations. I hope, fingers crossed, to do some more video on that in the future, where essentially Australia is leading the world in some really innovative combinations to get us the productivity benefits of an A combination and versatility of an A combination, but with the dynamics of B combination. Probably more detail than I can go into here, but I'm happy to take that question on notice and come back directly. Justin's got a question on self-driving trucks. Fair way there. What we're going to see first is a lot of ADAS, advanced driver assistance features. So essentially a backup to support the driver, and it's important that's how it's used. The moment you start relying on that backup, bad things occur. You'll start seeing a spike in crashes. That's really been the lesson learned from smart braking and roll stability systems, is if you don't monitor how often they're intervening, drivers will let them intervene all the time. It's like a reserve parachute if you're skydiving. If you're having to cut away your main chute and throw your reserve parachute 4 out of every 5 jumps, you do not have a long career of skydiving ahead of you, and the same applies here. Victoria asks about one of my pet hates, which is trucks turning left or turning an intersection and having a car dive up the inside and be crushed. I get asked a fair bit by our claims team about these events. What's your thoughts on this one, Adam? And they are one that I push very hard to fight wherever we think we can. Although I will say the courts have a history of almost random findings. At times where I thought it was a slam dunk because of the evidence available and we've lost. And on the flip side, ones where it was really, he said versus she said, or he said versus he said, actually, in this particular case, and we won. So it's better if we can have the dash camera footage, which is why I mentioned the rear view mirror mounted cameras in 4 camera systems, although even they, depending on the combination, aren't 100%. Certainly, I believe that those ones are one we need to fight regularly because it's, one where we tend to get the short end of the stick historically. Question here from Stuart Gardner. Should we be trying to get more freight onto rail? I love rail, despite being a truck engineer, but it's economic forces that drive how freight moves. The reason why rail has historically retreated out of a number of freight tasks and a number of regions is because it was significantly disproportionately more expensive than other freight modes. We can make choices to push for rail, even though it doesn't make economic sense, but it runs the risk, particularly for lots of export commodities, of making those commodities commercially unviable in the international market. One of the things that has made our economy particularly powerful is the competitiveness of our freight component. And if we can't get packaged beef to market cheaply, then the Argentine beef growers will. Lorraine, I'll take your question on dash cameras on notice, and I'll reach out to you directly. If I don't, I should be able to get your details via the registration, so I'll reach out to you that way. If Farah can please note that down so I don't forget, thank you. Just keeping an eye on time, some really absolutely brilliant questions here. So I do apologise for those that we don't get to during this session. If you're interested in the report, please jump on our NTI Better Business Hub. We'll include it in the wrap-up email, and you can download it there. So Fran discusses really good, the woman in that video from Ron Crouch Transport. I'll pass on what Ron Crouch said, but the police from the area involved were absolutely spectacular. That they went out of their way to respond positively and made a big effort to find the person. Like, they were literally setting up roadblocks around to make sure that the person was located, and he had nothing but praise to say for the police response. And it's important that we celebrate when, you know, government, regulators, police do well, because it's easy to just focus on the negatives. Callum asked a question around faultless excess. I'll flag, I'm a truck engineer, not an insurance specialist, but the key element here is recovery. The element that we require is that we are been able to recover against that party, and that's built into all of our wordings there. Thank you, Fran, for the message of support. I really do appreciate it. Yes, certainly anything you can do to get the word out to your customers. And on the flip side, understand that I am, as a resource, available to you and your customers. I probably once a week get a customer question in via a broker. It might be they're having issues around some regulatory intervention, or they want to know about a new technology. That's why NTI has me around here. Cameron, your question on number plate recognition, I will feed that request back into our internal broker portal development team. I would love to see it. It's something we do in our roadside and direct product space. I'm not sure what the roadmap is currently onto our general space. I've got some ideas around how we make it as easy as possible for you guys to be able to complete the vehicle information that we need to be able to write a policy. That, you know, a significant part of what we do is make ourselves easy to do business with, and that's an area where we can continue to improve. So no, really, really great point. I'll pass it on to that team. Adele, your question on blind spots will include, that'll be part of the information we send out. The NHVRs sharing the road information is pretty good on that one. They're actually better on the blind spot space than they are on the following distance space. As I said, I like this TMR Street Smarts campaign around following distance. So we'll include that in the wrap up email. Actually, Brad, your question here, how can a company and driver reduce accidents when the majority of accidents are in their blind spot from the left in metro traffic? Can you include a tool chest with the hat and wine? Just in case anyone's wondering, it's not a virtual background. This is my shed. I'm a classic engineer. I'm a tinkerer. Really great one. If you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. I'm literally meeting with a major road manager tomorrow to discuss this truck blind spot left merge issue in a discrete location. And everything we've got at the moment is around a technology like the Mobileye that does blind spot monitoring. What I'm racking my brain on is there's something cool we can do that is infrastructure based rather than vehicle based, because this is a discrete location where this is an issue, although it's not unique. There's other areas where they have the same problem. And there is some cool infrastructure based stuff. In one of the tunnels in Victoria, the road manager is about to roll out coloured lights that sort of travel down the road at the speed limit to help people set their following distance built into the wall. And it's based out of some technology in Japan, and it's really cool. And you don't have to build it into each car. You just build it once in the infrastructure. So yeah, Brad, if you've got any ideas on it, I'd love to hear them. The only one I've got at the moment, making sure their drivers use their mirrors. I did a bit of a piece on mirror cam technology where Daimler replaces the mirrors with cameras, and the nice part about those is those cameras can steer. It was internal, so it hasn't been published, but I'll reach out to you on that one. Unfortunately, the Toolbox was actually a gift from my lovely dear wife, so I think she'd be a bit heartbroken if we sent it out as well. Simon.
I think we're going to have to call it.
We'll have to call it there. Yep, I agree. Sorry, we didn't get to. We will write up, I think, a Q&A summary. I think this has really been really fantastic and my absolute pleasure and privilege to present.
Absolutely.
I know Farrell mentioned it as well, but yeah, please, the survey that will pop up when you complete this is exceptionally important to me, more than I can really put into words. So I ask you, please, if you've completed any feedback you've got, really welcome. Yeah, absolutely. So just to reiterate, please answer the questions in that survey. They do help us continue to deliver relevant topics to you.
The presentation recording will absolutely be made available to everyone. Still lots of people coming through and asking for that. So please rest assured we'll get that out to you over the coming days. The only other thing I wanted to add to the end of this session is that next month we will be hosting another webinar on the 9th of September, I believe the date is, featuring our marine experts. In the meantime, if you have any other questions that you'd like Adam or any of our team to answer, please feel free to send them through to webinar@nti.com.au. We will package up some resources after this session, including the recording, including a copy of the investigation report, as well as a Q&A document answering questions from this session. But thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, I'm really pleased to see that so many people found it valuable, and we will see you again, hopefully next month. So thank you.
Thank you very much.